Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Deb Radcliffe, Strategic Analyst at Cyber Risk Alliance. I'm happy to moderate today's broadcast titled Stopping Attacks Using NDR, sponsored by Corelight. Today we have two experts with us, Ed Smith, Senior Product Manager at Corelight, and Chris Hallam, Senior Product Manager at Microsoft. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping. If you'd like to ask any questions, please select the Q&A button below. If you're interested in accessing additional resources provided by our sponsor, select the Handouts button below. Also note that a recording of today's presentation will be made available on demand after the event. And now we turn the discussion over to Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, I'm excited to talk to you all today, although it looks like I just skipped my first slide here. Sorry about that. At any rate, I'm excited to talk to this audience. I love the Corelight integration that we're about to talk about. And before we get to the details of that, kind of want to set up the threat landscape just so you kind of understand where Microsoft's head is at and also Corelight's head is at on the threat landscape and how it's impacting our customers. Our customers have experienced a large growth of their attack surface area in recent years. In fact, it's grown by about 3 times in just the last probably 2 to 3 years. And it continues to grow at about 22% just in terms of IoT. So it's the IoT devices that organizations are adding at hyperscale in many of these organizations, and they're growing at a fast rate. While laptops, traditional workstations, servers, and mobile devices, those are relatively flat. They're still growing, but it's really the IoT devices that they're gobbling up all this new attack surface area that's being added to the environment. And so this is a problem that our customers really need to get their arms around, because it's not the workstations that they'll have to worry about so much. It's really about these IoT devices. And when I talk to people about IoT, a lot of them kind of are not really familiar with the types of attacks that happen on them. They think that they're more hypothetical. A lot of people say, why would somebody attack a Nest thermostat or a smart TV inside a business? And the reason is not because those are interesting devices necessarily. It's because they're interesting gateways. These devices can be used as a means to go from the internet into a corporate network if you were to compromise an internet-connected camera, as an example. They're also useful for lateral movement. So if we look at a traditional attack vector where an attacker compromises somebody's email or compromises the endpoint through an email phishing attack and ends up on the endpoint, the attacker will do reconnaissance. And one of the things they're going to look for is other vulnerable devices on the network. And the most vulnerable devices on the network are going to be the IoT devices. So they will use those to move laterally to basically go dark, because when they end up on an IoT device, typically SecOps loses visibility to those devices, and because they're oftentimes not monitored. So they're used for lateral movement. They're also used for persistence. If you can evade visibility by going onto an IoT device, you can add an implant there, and you can do all sorts of things. You can persist over time, et cetera. So IoT devices are really kind of a gateway attack to getting into the data center, et cetera. And as you can see here on the slide, there's a number of news stories that are pretty real, right? You have the NASA breach, which was really interesting. It's kind of an old one, but you have more recent ones where smart building systems are being attacked. There's a camera system here as well. And then we have OT attacks, operational technology attacks like the Colonial Pipeline. So these attacks are very real, and they're increasing in volume. When we talk to CISOs and CIOs, a lot of them are deploying IoT at scale, as I mentioned. In fact, 68% of organizations believe that the deployment of IoT devices is central to achieving their business goals. So digital transformation is being achieved in many ways, one of which is through IoT. So most people, 68% are using this as a way to move their businesses forward. What's interesting is 60% of organizations, as they deploy this and broaden this attack surface area with IoT devices, they recognize that IoT is the least secure aspect of their organization. So there's this irony. To digitally transform, they have to deploy more IoT, and yet they do it knowing that this is probably the weakest link in their infrastructure. And oddly, only 31% of organizations are even hesitating as they deploy. They rarely slow down. They rarely stop as they run into issues. They just keep on deploying more and more IoT because business interests trump security at the end of the day. And so when we talk to them about, well, what do you need help with? What are the things? The number one thing, 71% of customers are saying, look, we just don't have optics into these devices. We don't have a complete inventory. We might be using spreadsheets or Shodan or maybe some kludgy tools. Most organizations we talk to are not deploying an IoT specific solution to give them visibility. In fact, there's a Fortune 500 company that I can't name that up until recently had no inventory of their IoT solutions outside of a basic spreadsheet type of tool they were using. 70% of our customers tell us that the devices that they are deploying, that they recognize that these are coming from the vendor insecure. They're shipping with known vulnerabilities. They're shipping with an attack surface area that's too broad, meaning there's ports that are open that are not even used for the function of the device. And so these devices are ripe for attack, which is why attackers are increasingly using them. And then the last thing that they're struggling with is they don't have optics to when these devices are even involved in attacks. So they don't have tools that help them monitor and get a sense of when an IoT device is involved in an attack. Oftentimes these things are not monitored. There's no visibility to them. And so when an attacker moves from an endpoint to an IoT device, SecOps oftentimes loses visibility to that. And they have a hard job trying to kind of patch together the end-to-end story. So there's lots of challenges that they're facing. And what a lot of organizations we talk to have done is they try to address this IoT threat using traditional solutions. They're using firewalls, NAC, vulnerability scanners, none of which are designed specifically as bespoke IoT solutions. These are more general purpose solutions. And so our customers are using these types of solutions and oftentimes not an IoT specific solutions, because the reality is these types of IoT, bespoke solutions, as I've talked about, are new. They're in their infancy and they're not providing the efficacy that has incented customers to go out and buy these en masse. So this is a relatively new market. Everybody's shopping for solutions, but everybody's saying, I wish the solutions were better. And so that's something, of course, that Microsoft wants to help with, and our partnership with Corelight is going to help us get there. So let's transition to a discussion about Microsoft Defender for IoT. Some of you may know this is Azure Defender for IoT. At the recent Ignite just a few weeks ago, we rebranded it to Microsoft Defender for IoT. But as a solution, this solution will look very familiar. This is very similar to an endpoint protection platform. The thing that's different is it's for IoT endpoints. Another thing that's different about it is most endpoint protection platforms don't have the concept of discovery, right? The idea on a traditional endpoint is you put an image on a device, it includes an agent, and it's basically discovered on its own because the agent goes and tries to contact a management or a security system. IoT devices are very different. And so discovering the inventory is central. And because IoT devices in general do not have an agent on them, you actually have to use a network signal to go out and look for the traffic of those devices. And when you see that traffic, that's how you discover and add them to inventory. So something is different with an endpoint protection platform versus one designed for IoT is this concept of discovery. And we use network data to do that. Beyond that, it's very similar to a lot of endpoint protection platforms. It has detection and response and prevention capabilities. Something that we have in addition is we have vulnerability management. Those are typically other solutions, but in the case of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, we include vulnerability management in our endpoint protection platform. And we do the same with our IoT platform. Something that's interesting about our solution that kind of separates us from other IoT specific solutions is our customers are using Microsoft 365 Defender, or in particular, the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint aspect of that. We're able to give you IoT inventory and do detection and response probably quicker than any other system in the world. Maybe there's an exception that I'm not aware of, but we are taking a unique approach. And what makes us different is most solutions out there require the deployment of a network sensor before you can get any sort of telemetry that allows you to discover and do threat detection, et cetera. For customers that have deployed Defender for Endpoint, we use the agent there as our network sensor. So with that, we can actually go out and instantly start discovering IoT inventory that is speaking on the network to Defender for Endpoint clients. And that nuance is very important. So an IoT device that only talks to the internet and never talks to an endpoint for Defender client would never be discovered by that sensor. And that's why we still need a network sensor on the network to get full visibility. But for organizations using Defender for Endpoint, we're going to see a large subset of their total IoT inventory, and we can give them instant value, which is great for organizations who want to run a quick POC and see what can happen with our solution. Now, as I mentioned, we also need a network sensor. So if you want to get the totality of all the IoT inventory, we have our own network sensor. And then we also can work with third-party sensors. And Corelight is the first solution that has integrated with Defender and Defender for IoT. And so when Corelight is deployed in the organization, they can connect that to Microsoft Defender 365. And we will leverage that data and run all of our inventory, our analytics, our behavior monitoring, our machine learning, all the smarts that we have on the system. We reason over that data that we collect directly from Corelight to perform all of our normal functions. So for Corelight customers that are already out there, you just turn this on and send the data to us, and we'll process it, and we start giving you alerts and vulnerability management capability, et cetera. And so that Corelight partnership is really great. And then, of course, one thing that's very important is our sensor is only used for NDR for IoT devices. So for organizations that are looking to do NDR on traditional endpoints, servers, and mobile devices, that's not something that we do with our sensor. That's something that Corelight does. So that's another reason that some customers might use their sensor instead of ours, is because ours is really just designed for IoT-based network signals. How does the system work? Well, basically, we collect that data from the network sensor, whatever it is. Maybe it's MDE, maybe it's our own sensor, maybe it's Corelight's. And we process that data. We look at hardware attributes, network attributes, software attributes, all the things you can see there on the slide. And inevitably, what we do is we create behavior models for each of those IoT devices, and then we monitor for anomalies. So we basically create a blueprint of how that device operates normally. When it deviates from norm, we can generate alerts and incidents and these types of things. Another thing we can do with this data is we can generate a network map, and this is useful for OT devices. And so OT devices are very complex systems with interesting topologies, and so we can use the communication between ICS devices, PLCs, et cetera, and create a topology of your OT infrastructure so that you can see how it's connected, how it's communicating, et cetera. And of course, this data also gives us the ability to do risk assessments, meaning vulnerability assessments, detections, and responses as well. What we do with these signals is we provide our customers with a unified solution for both OT or IoT and OT. So unlike a lot of solutions out there in the marketplace that are maybe separate, maybe they're just OT focused or they're just more IT focused, we bring them together all in one console. And that console lives in Azure along with all the other Azure capabilities. So it's nice that it's an integrated solution. But something that came up as we were building the product, a lot of our customers who are using Microsoft Defender or Microsoft 365 Defender said, hey, I like that you have an integrated experience over there, but could you send that data over to the Microsoft 365 Defender side as well so that I could experience it alongside my traditional endpoints, servers, and mobile devices? And we thought that was a great idea. So all of the discovery, the vulnerability assessments, the detections, the responses that you can see in the Azure Console for enterprise IoT devices, meaning IT types of devices, we send all of that information over to Microsoft 365 Defender, and you can view all of those same things in the Defender experience. So you're going to get your asset inventory for all of your IT-related IoT devices. We often call those enterprise IoT devices. You're going to be able to see all your vulnerability management for those same devices. So if an enterprise IoT device like a smart TV or voice over IP device needs a new version of its firmware, we're going to give you the information you need to become aware of that and the instructions on how to update it. We'll also integrate those enterprise IoT devices into one of the best features. It's actually my favorite feature, Microsoft 365 Defender, which is the concept of an incident. A lot of products out there in the marketplace, they give you a long list of alerts, and SecOps has to correlate the alerts and kind of see how they're related into actual attacks. That's something that Microsoft 365 Defender does it on its own. So as an attack kill chain begins with an email that goes to an endpoint and then moves laterally to an IoT device, we connect all those dots and bring them into one integrated view that we call an incident. So you'll be able to see that entire kill chain all the way from its beginning all the way to its end. And then we also have an integration, of course, with Sentinel. And what's great about Sentinel, which is our SIEM, is in the case of an IT network, the attack from the email to the endpoint to the IoT device, We're going to show you that view. But what happens when an attack maybe hops networks? It goes from the IoT device to the network device, maybe a switch, and then it moves laterally over into the OT network. That's where Microsoft 365 Defender loses visibility. It doesn't monitor those networks, but Sentinel gives you global optics and can bring that end-to-end attack into one integrated story, as you see here on the slide. And so one last slide before we hand off to Ed here is just about the research. Something that Microsoft is very proud of is the type of R&D that we have, and in particular, the research to do threat detection. So Microsoft has the privilege of having access to the broadest range of signals in the world. We have about 24 trillion signals coming in daily, and our research teams are able to reason over that, use their behavior analytics. They can apply machine learning. They can develop new machine learning models, et cetera. And we're able to identify unique attacks that we believe, in theory, many of our competitors might have difficulty discovering because they just don't have access to the data. So that's something that we believe will give our customers a higher level of efficacy when it comes to the threat detections and the responses. And what we can do with that, oops, I advanced the slide too quickly before we hand off to Ed here. One thing we can do with that is we leverage the Corelight signal. And what's really interesting about Corelight, and this is what I like about the integration, is that Corelight uses an open NDR concept and uses this Zeek schema for the network data. That puts it into a state that enables our researchers to use an open source network signal. And that's why our research team is willing to do an investment on the signal from Corelight and others that maybe use our open platform to do threat detections from third-party signals. And that's something that doesn't happen very often in the industry. And so that's one of the things I find really exciting about the partnership with Corelight is we can leverage their signal. And so with that said, let's talk more about Corelight and hand off to Ed.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. So I'm guessing most of the folks on this call today are familiar with Microsoft. I'm guessing some of you may not be familiar with Corelight. So a quick introduction to Corelight. We are a network detection and response company, and our focus is to provide the world's best network evidence so that SecOps teams can quickly close investigations, even when those investigations go back years. And as Chris mentioned, Microsoft Defender for IoT can leverage our network signal, which comes from the open source Zeek project that Chris mentioned. And Defender for IoT can do all the great things that Chris mentioned, giving you deeper insight into IoT risk. So Corelight customers out there, just a few clicks, you can integrate Corelight with Defender for IoT and get all those benefits. But what I wanted to talk about now is how our open NDR platform can help you go beyond just those IoT and OT devices with coverage that gives you protection and insight for all of the devices on your network, whether those are servers, workstations, cloud assets, really anything with an IP address. So let's take a look at our platform. And in terms of three key areas of functionality. So first are the network alerts and insights that we provide. And this is done via an intrusion detection system called Suricata, which we've built into our sensors. If you're not familiar with Suricata, it's an open source IDS, intrusion detection system, and it uses signatures of known bad network activity. And in addition to those alerts that are provided by Suricata, Corelight also includes a suite of behavioral analytics and detections. So we can do things like provide insights into things like port scanning, typing that's going on over an encrypted connection, and brute force attempts. Second, looking at that middle pillar is how we enable faster and more conclusive investigations. So one of the challenges with an IDS in general is the difficulty in differentiating between benign activity and real threats. So to do that effectively and quickly, analysts really need access to the data that surrounds that alert so they can understand the full context. So where is that scan coming from? What were the web pages that were visited before that alert was fired? Were there any files that were downloaded? Were there any DNS requests that preceded that file download? And then what were the answers to those DNS responses? So these are all questions that can be answered by Zeek. And that's another open source tool, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And then third is the ability to validate, to get that validation. And sometimes the data that's provided by Zeek and Suricata doesn't provide that full context and that full validation. So oftentimes an analyst will want to go examine the actual network traffic. And a lot of times this is stored in a packet capture file or a PCAP file. With Corelight, we have a feature called Smart PCAP, and this gives incident responders the ability to link directly to a relevant portion of the PCAP file. And one of the interesting things with Smart PCAP is that it captures network traffic much more selectively than a full PCAP solution. So we're arming analysts not only with the relevant data, but also the ability to have data that goes back much further back in time, since our sensors are only keeping that network traffic when triggered. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, let's take a look at how Corelight fits in your infrastructure. So we're looking at a diagram of a typical deployment, and if we kind of walk through this left to right, we start off with the data source. So on premises, this is usually a packet broker, maybe a tap or a span port, feeding our sensors. In a cloud environment, you may have a VTAP, a virtual tap, or virtual packet mirroring, also sending data into our sensors. And then we have our sensors which perform the traffic analysis. They're available in a variety of form factors. I'll go into more detail on the form factors in a moment. And then we can also do enrichment at the point of observation by bringing in threat intelligence feeds, environmental data like information on from a CMDB to enrich that data and add a lot of value before we send it on down the line. And that's the the next step is the information that we're producing, the Zeek evidence in the form of logs. We have the Suricata alerts, and then as well as those smart packet capture information that we're sending out. And then that ends up in a variety of places, depending on the tools you're using. And of course, we have the IoT integration. We can send all the Zeek logs into Defender for IoT and to 365 Defender, as Chris mentioned. We can also send to other destinations as well. So your SIM, if that's Sentinel or a different SIM or analytics solution, as well as file analysis tools to do things like malware analysis on files that we have extracted from the wire. And in today's data-driven environments, managing this flow of data into your systems is really critical, and Corelight can help in a number of ways. We have capture filters so that you can screen out traffic at the NIC. So for traffic that you don't need to analyze with our sensors, we can do data reduction to remove low value fields, redundant information, reduce by about up to 30% or more the amount of data that we're sending into your SIM or analytics, which depending on what solution you're using, that can also mean some cost savings as well. We could do traffic shunting. So if you have large elephant flows, so think of things like massive video files or multi-petabyte research files, we can shunt that traffic. And then we can do forking and filtering as well. So we can send the logs, these alerts, to one destination, or you can fork the traffic to multiple destinations for operational or cost reasons. So digging a little bit further into each of these three areas, if we look a bit closer at Suricata, what's interesting is that a lot of the the world's top blue teams are deploying both Zeek, the network security monitor, as well as Suricata IDS in parallel. So as an IDS, Suricata really excels at raising alerts via binary pattern matching. And with Zeek, you have a tool that's really great at generating rich connection-linked protocol logs that's helping those analysts make sense of the network activity around that given alert, around that Suricata alert. So what this does is this is giving both signal and evidence to the security analysts, and this lets them move more quickly and more decisively in responding to those threats. However, implementing these two open source technologies can be challenging, especially on a shared server. Operating that at scale can be very challenging especially in high throughput environments. So with Corelight, our physical sensors can enable organizations to easily deploy this open source design pattern that we've seen in use by the world's top defenders, and do that quickly and easily in a single form factor that's going to help them accelerate their analysis, unify that Zeek and Suricata data, and we have some pretty interesting tricks that we do to make this happen, including a shared CPU architecture. So it's very easy to get both of these tools deployed in your environment. So looking a little bit closer at Zeek, and Zeek has been a core of Corelight, from our company from the very beginning. So Zeek was originally named Bro. So if you may have heard of the word Bro in the past, we've recently renamed the tool, or the open source project has been renamed to Zeek. So Zeek, or Bro, was created in 1995 by Corelight's co-founder and chief scientist Vern Paxson. So over the past 25 years, we've seen a lot of adoption and improvement with Zeek. Organizations of all types across civilian, military, intelligence, foreign governments, universities, and of course, enterprises. And then we've really started to see things snowball over the past 5 or 10 years. A lot of more enterprises are adopting Zeek because really it is the de facto standard for network traffic analysis. There really is no better way to extract data from network traffic for security use cases. So digging a little bit deeper into Zeek, so what is Zeek? What does it produce? And the answer is that what Zeek outputs are logs, or Zeek logs. And these are structured and linked sets of relevant security data, extremely useful for use in investigations. So in this example that we see on the screen, we have 5 of the standard Zeek logs, and you'll notice a couple of things. When we start in the middle with the con log, or the connection log, this is probably the most central of all of the Zeek logs, because every TCP connection is going to generate an entry into that con log. And in fact, each one of those network connections is given a unique identifier, also known as a UID, which is what is highlighted in blue, although that might be kind of hard to see on the screen here. So as you can see with these dotted lines, other logs also include that UID. So this is really useful for analysts when they need to pivot quickly from the con log to other logs to do things like examine DNS requests and responses, and what were the web pages visited, what were the files sent, what were the linked related emails, and lots of other connections and pivot points that way. So with Zeek, you're getting roughly 40 or so logs that are standard with Zeek, and Corelight also includes some other logs, and you can write and install your own custom packages to extend the functionality and of the sensors and the logs as well. The other great thing that Zeek can do, and that Corelight can help with, is provide insight into encrypted traffic. So I think, as we all know, majority of the traffic on the internet today is encrypted. it poses a challenge, right? Where we're missing visibility into that encrypted traffic. And of course, there are ways to break and inspect that traffic, but that's not always feasible to do that type of decryption due to privacy, policy, or other legal issues. If you're doing the decryption and you send us that data, we are happy to analyze it just like any other traffic. But in situations where that's not feasible, we provide a lot of really good insights, which include things like dynamic protocol detection. So Zeek, we can reliably detect SSL traffic no matter what port it's running on. We can give you insights into the certificates that are being used. So are there any self-signed certificates, any expired or soon to expire certificates? And you can find that information in the SSL log. Do things like fingerprinting the SSL connections. So Zeek has a community package called JA3. It's useful for fingerprinting SSL handshakes. That way you can whitelist or blacklist certain SSL connections based on their fingerprint. And then we give you that context. So in addition to information on the SSL sessions, you can get useful related context on the DNS, the network connection, etc. And that brings us to smart packet capture, or smart PCAP. So traditionally, when you have an investigation where it gets to the point where the actual packets are needed, we need to look at what was the actual network communication that took place. So when it gets to that point, analysts have traditionally turned to a full packet capture solution. Full packet capture solutions are really great for some purposes because they store a copy of literally everything that happened on the network. However, because they're literally storing a copy of everything that happened on the network, that tends to fill up storage very quickly. What does that mean? Well, it means that storage can be very expensive, and then you're also limited by that storage in terms of how far you're able to look back in time, because you're limited based on that storage. So you might be limited to only days or even hours of look back time due to those limitations and costs. With our smart PCAP, we deliver a great and more cost-effective solution in situations where you really don't need that full packet capture. And the result is that we can save up to 50% on costs and give you, up to 10x longer retention. The way that we do this is through our Zeek-based protocol analyzers. And so you get comprehensive, compact network evidence, and then the ability to easily configure the precise packet capture that you need. And then from there, it's just a one-click packet retrieval in your SIM, and that also really helps streamline investigations. So drilling down into the solution options, the form factors, available in 4 options in terms of a physical hardware appliance, cloud sensor, a software sensor, or virtual machine deployment. With the physical sensors, they're available in 4 sizes based on bandwidth: 210, 25, 100 gigs. You have our cloud sensor, can be deployed in Azure or other cloud environments. And then more recently, we've introduced a software sensor. It's extremely flexible. You can deploy it on basically any 64-bit Linux distribution out there. And then, of course, we have the VM options for your Hyper-V or other virtual environments. And then to help you manage your sensors, we have a fleet manager, which enables you to administer up to 250 Corelight sensors from a central location. So the last thing I wanted to touch on, and this is beyond the core capability of our open platform, is the ability to extend it through customization, tuning, and packages that you can find from Corelight as well as the community. So Corelight's done a lot of the upfront work in curating a set of packages that are drawn from our own research team, from the Zeek community, and then of course many of our customers have are Zeek users that have deployed their own custom packages to meet the requirements of their environment. So a couple interesting packages I wanted to point out here. The first is the Core collection. This gives you things like lateral movement detection, cryptomining detection, HTTP stalling for when a web client executes a resource exhaustion attack on a web server, detections of long connections, and things like port scanning. We also have the encrypted traffic collection. This gives you dozens of insights into SSL, SSH, RDP, along with encrypted insights from the Zeek community, like the GA3 fingerprinting that I mentioned earlier. And this is visibility that you get even without decrypting the traffic. More recently, we've introduced the C2 collection, really useful for finding command and control activity. It gives you over 50 unique insights into detections. And this has all been battle tested by some of the world's most sophisticated organizations. So you get visibility into known C2 toolkits and other indications of novel attacks. So to kind of wrap up my section here in summary with Corelight, not only are you getting that quick and easy data source for IoT risk in Microsoft Defender, but also a full open NDR solution that's giving you the alerts, the insight, the evidence, and the validation, which is really useful for hunting and responding to threats, targeting any type of device. And so with that, I'd like to hand things back to Deb to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed and Chris. That was very informative. As a reminder to our viewers, if you have a question, select the Q&A button at the bottom of the console. If we're not able to answer your question during the broadcast, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Right now, I'm going through our question list in the interface. Please send them if you have any. We've got a couple here. I'll start with the first one. Does Corelight NDR support Azure monitoring? If so, what's the integration like?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So Corelight can do traffic analysis for your Azure VMs, so you can get visibility into the traffic that's coming to and from those instances. So we have integrations with some of our partners like cPacket and Garland, which is great because they can give you solution not only for your on-premises packet broker requirements, but also offer solutions for Azure as well.
Good. I always say Azure. It's Azure. Sorry, folks. I'm new to NDR. What are the low-hanging fruit I can tackle quickly when it comes to my IoT OT devices?
Got it. So I can kind of answer from just a broader, yeah.
Can you repeat the question? I missed it. I'm sorry. You broke up there a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. What kind of, I'm sorry, let me see. I'm new to NDR. What are the low-hanging fruit that I can tackle quickly when it comes to my IoT/OT devices?
And maybe I could address that from a broader NDR perspective, and then Chris, if there's any comment you want to add on that on there, maybe we can start with that.
Yeah.
Cool. So great question. Love that you're new to NDR and are looking to learn more. One really good resource that we have available on our website, and you can probably just do a web search for this, is the Corelight Threat Hunting Guide, and it talks to some example scenarios and things to look for in your environment using network data. That's a really great starting point. Another resource you can search for is the Zeek log cheat sheet. So earlier when we saw the Zeek logs, this is really kind of a detailed description of all the different fields that are available from Zeek. So really good resource when you're getting started with NDR. And then if you really want to get hands-on, we have a program called Corelight at Home. also something you can search for. I think, or if you just head to the Corelight website, you'll find it in our menu. So Corelight at Home is great. It's a free program. You just need to have a Raspberry Pi, and we'll give you a free license to use Corelight at home on your home network. And you can find a lot of really cool and interesting and sometimes weird things. We've had folks that are monitoring their Tesla. We've had somebody that found that their wife's employer was kind of spying, using a little bit of spyware while they were working at home. Connections out to China from IoT devices. So it's I think especially for the IoT angle, like Corelight at Home is a if you have a Raspberry Pi and like doing a little home project, it's a great way to see what's going on with your IoT devices at home.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing too. When we talk to a lot of our customers, I'll just add one little book into it. Our customers are telling us that oftentimes they have no sort of solution they don't have an NDR solution. And so when they tend to turn these types of products on, they start seeing new alerts that are not familiar with. It can be a little overwhelming. And so what we believe is a good approach is to kind of start focusing on the inventory side of the house. Get your arms around this set of devices that you knew you had, but you didn't have the inventory, and start there. And then kind of grow things out to detection and response.
Sorry, I broke in there for a second. Next question. What kind of network and endpoint data is most valuable to collect for hunting and response purposes?
I'll start with an endpoint comment.
I can chime. Go for it.
Oh, go ahead, Ed. You got it. Okay, I'll start with the endpoint. On the endpoint side, when you have an agent on in the device, right? We're talking about not IoT devices in this case. The key thing is a lot of the process data, the timeline, what processes are starting, what sub-processes are they creating, that type of stuff is probably the first thing to start with. Ed, why don't you add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So I like to think of this in terms of the Sock Triad, right? So this is a term that Gartner defined a couple of years ago in terms of there's three things that Sock needs for visibility. You need the endpoint data, which Chris mentioned. You need the network data, and then you're typically feeding this into a SIEM like Sentinel. And then underpinning all of that, you have threat intelligence data, IOCs, other content like Suricata alerts. So I think that's a great way to look at it in terms of investigation and threat hunting is making sure that you have that visibility. And then as far as network data, we talked a little bit about Zeek. Obviously, I think Zeek is a great source, pretty much the de facto standard for network data. Giving you the all the information in the logs and such. I think it's interesting to compare Zeek data to other sources of network data, right? So you may have application logs, you may have firewall logs, you may have NetFlow logs. A lot of times these other data sources are kind of byproducts of an application or a service. They're really not meant for security. And that means they can be kind of limited in their context or have a lot of, extra information that's not really relevant. So, I think with Zeek, you're getting a single source of network traffic that really provides all of the context that you need. It's designed for security, and it's passive. It's out of band. So unlike, let's say, debug logging on a DNS server, maybe your IT department wants to turn that off because it's affecting performance, or maybe an attacker disabled it to cover their tracks. With a network source like with Zeek and with Corelight, we're sitting out of band, passively monitoring that network traffic. So it's very hard to bypass that, or even know for an attacker to know that we're there monitoring it.
Hey, Ed, I wanted to add one thing there. That passive point you made is so crucial. A lot of our customers who are running operational technology, OT, ICS, SCADA, these types of technologies, when they bring a solution in like this, or are considering bringing one, they're worried about downtime, right? They're worried about it being invasive and it causing networking issues. a lot of these OT devices are very sensitive to network traffic that might interfere with production, as an example. And so when you bring a solution like Corelight in, a network sensor like that is passive and has no impact on these devices, they can rest assured that production can continue and security can get the optics that they're looking for.
Great point.
Good answers. Okay, here's an interesting one. You mentioned that the security experience for IoT devices can be viewed in both the Azure and the Microsoft 365 console. What is the feature parity between them?
Yeah, the good news is that there's complete parity. So it's kind of unusual for us to build a console like we built in Azure that has the integrated enterprise IoT and the OT story, and then to have that same experience show up somewhere else. Typically, you have these products kind of separate, but we got such strong demand from our Microsoft 365 Defender customers that, hey, we want to bring that and integrate that with this view that we already have that already gives us optics to mail and endpoints, identity, etc. So they asked us bring the IoT devices in as well. It made total sense, and so we've made sure that the views between these two spaces are identical and have feature parity. The only distinction between them is the OT devices, the things that are not enterprise IoT devices. Those do remain only on the Azure Console side. It's just the enterprise or the IT focused devices that are on the IT network that we bring over into Microsoft 365.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ed?
No, I think Chris covered it.
Okay, well, it looks like we're out of questions unless a new one pops in the interface, but I'm not seeing one. Does anybody want to add any closing statements before we close out this webcast?
Yeah, I'll make one statement here. The technology that we present is going public preview on December 1st. So everything I talked about is roadmap, but the public preview will be available in just a few weeks away. And so we encourage all of you to watch our blog for the formal announcement, and then we'll give you the links you need to start taking advantage of this new functionality.
Excellent. And I just wanted to add on, appreciate Chris joining.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little bit of a lag here, but yeah. Just wanted to thank Chris for joining us, and that we're really excited about the partnership opportunity with Defender for IoT.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. The partnership's been great. I love that we're able to bring this out to market in our public preview together, just a couple weeks away.
Do you have a link to that blog that you just referenced, Chris?
I can send one, yeah. Give me one moment.
Excellent. That way the audience can find it quickly and follow up on your release date. Okay, well, that looks like these are all our questions. If we were not able to answer any of your questions during the live presentation, watch your email for a response within a few days. For additional resources provided by our sponsor, be sure to select the handouts button below. And watch this location for a recording of today's presentation, which will be made available on demand. To our speakers, I say thank you for being with us today and educating us on this important topic. Thanks to Corelight for sponsoring this webcast. And of course, thanks to all of you in our audience for tuning in.